I find it devilishly coincidental that we do a show where we're talking about the last food that one would ingest before dying, and then a mere, a week later, I have a meal that tried to kill me. I think there's something that is just strangely coincidental there. I won't say ironic, lest those folks that snipe Alanis Morissette come after me. And Doc knows what'll happen to a good Canadian with intentions that are completely decent, but says something that's taken completely out of context and twisted.
Oh, yes. Well, right now I can't even think of anybody from Canada but Mr. Gordon Lightfoot. R.I.P.
All right. He's a lot lighter now than he was, I will say that. But,
it's like you could read my mind, love.
I spent some time in a bottle, but, it's what it is. So, here's to food poisoning and migraines delaying our glorious recordings. That's just an absolute blast. So if I start to sound like Wolfman Jack over the course of this, it's because I just completely eviscerated the inside of my throat. And so I'm lucky that I'm speaking at the moment. That was very violent.
You feeling much better now, though?
Yes, I'm actually hydrated, or semi-hydrated. So here's to small favors, as it were.
So you've only had like 3 gallons of water today as opposed to your typical 6 or 7.
Well, here's an endorsement for Liquid IV. It is exceedingly helpful to get a little electrolyte boost and help to replenish a little faster. Melissa uses it all the time, and I am now a vocal proponent. So it's fun.
My heart went out to you, though. I've only had food poisoning once in my life, and it was, about 14, 15 years ago. And it was the worst pain I'd ever... I had these cramps that just had me doubled over at like 3 o'clock in the morning, where I literally felt like I was going to die. I was like, this is not getting better. This is the end. I'm 24-year-old Mike or whatever it was. And I remember calling my boss because I was a kitchen manager at the time. And I remember calling her at like 4:30 in the morning because I was supposed to be there for 6. And just like crying on the phone and be like, I can't come in. I'm in so much pain. I literally think I'm dying.
Well, I'll spare you the blow by blow, but just to paint a bit of a picture for circumstances, I was out and about. I hadn't eaten anything, and it was 3 p.m. So I was like, I'll grab something quick, and we're probably going to have dinner in a reasonable hour here. So maybe 2-3 hours later. So I swing through Jack in the Box, and I'm like, I'll get a couple tacos. It costs almost nothing, and, it's a fairly safe bet. Jack in the Box usually is like just total acid wash anyway for me. But I'm like, a couple tacos, that's not going to be too terrible. Famous last words. So the indication should have been that things were going awry when, like, the guy just opens the window. He's like, hey. Like, hi, good sir. Would you care to tell me what the total is for the food? Like, and he just mutely takes my card, closes the window, and I don't see him for 5 minutes. Now, again, this is 3 p.m, so it's not like they're brimming with activity. I'm the only person sitting at this store. So apparently they didn't even, de-thaw these things. They just threw them frozen into the fryer, kicked them out to me. I go eat. Unfortunately, then what gets tacked onto this later on in the evening is Melissa has been craving Chinese. So she's like, I'll pick up Panda on the way home. So then I stack Panda Express on top of Jack in the Box. And if you're going to have food poisoning, that is not a combination of foods that you want to experience multiple times.
Oh, no.
Wasn't any better coming out than it was going in, eh?
It was not in any aspect ratio. And so pray for me, friends.
Yeah, it's funny that when you said you had food poisoning, I was going to joke about it being bad tacos from Taco Bell. I didn't even think about Jack in the Box.
Missed the mark. Yes. And before I get too far afield, speaking of things you can't stomach, Heil, all of you out there, and by the eternal, behold. It is the Disinformed podcast. I'm Shane.
And I'm Michael.
All right, then. But yeah, it was some of the nastiest throat activity. Like, man, it's just a colossal. I'm not going to get us triggered here for having any further discourse on that. But yeah, things started going out of my nose when, like, I had been dry heaving for a long time, thinking that there was absolutely nothing in the whale. And then all of a sudden, just a gusher straight out of the nose. Nothing came out of my mouth. I was like, how is this even possible? How is that conceivable? That was just like a bad 80s prank that happened. It was Porky's 8, and it was just, Tubby takes a bathroom trek. So, not a grand time. But vacillating wildly from that, on top of this, and as a creative segue into what Michael and I were talking about pre-roll, I have been trying to change deodorants, to avoid the aluminums and all of these other things. So in the midst of feeling completely dead dog sick in a day that was reasonably warm for Oregon, I started using a new scent of native deodorant. Now, when I looked at the package, this is a proof positive that I am an individual who does not drink. So the fragrances involved in this are bourbon, which I'm like, okay, reasonable. And I enjoyed, the assorted bourbon scents for beards and things. So I was like, why not?
Yeah. Okay.
And then it was orange bitters.
Okay.
Now, I have never experienced this, obviously, in a bouquet generally, and I've never ingested. So when I tell you this, I don't want to, paint a picture that's incorrect, but this deodorant smells like the inside of your belly button after you have walked through the Sahara Desert for a month and a half.
Oh.
It is this putrid, absolutely ghastly, like rank sweat in a whorehouse where a clown has been for at least an hour and a half. Just not a pleasant scent. And this is a deodorant. So I was like, I kept smelling this and I was going like, it's one of those where you've just had the worst night of your life and you've probably, all these things. So there's just fragrances everywhere. And then I keep smelling this. I'm like, what the hell is that smell? Like I took a shower. I'm trying to deal with this and I smell, it's the deodorant is the ghastly thing. So I was like, well, thank you. I now managed to smell worse than the BO that I was attempting to battle with this. And so I can say, as other folks are presently battling sweat, be careful the weaponry you choose to protect yourself from your odoriferous emanations.
Yeah, no thanks. I have to take the heavy duty stuff. I don't have the luxury of cutting out these fanciful things like aluminum, or else I will be just glistening.
I'm returning to the fold. I have officially, I told Liz, I was like, Old Spice is getting my business back. I'm fine with the cancer as long as I don't just reek for the rest of my life. I will be a pretty smelling corpse. That's all I'm angling for.
Yeah, I'm an Old Spice man myself. I dated a woman back in Austin, like ages back, who would rub a rock. She had this like crystal. And that's what she would use. She would just rub this crystal under her arm, and she swore that it had like natural, like deodorizing effects. But it was just a rock.
Well, if Dan Aykroyd is to be believed, they do have semi-precious stones that they filter their vodka over. And, there's no scientific principle, according to him, that would say that it's actually leaching anything out of the liquids, and yet people prefer the profile once it's poured over those Herkimer semi-precious stones than they do when it's just, treated normally. So there's something to be said for things floating around in the earth.
Yeah, it must work better for women than it does for men, because I spent the night at her house one night and I had forgotten my deodorant. And so she was like, well, just use my crystal. And so I did. Ooh. And then I went to work, and by lunchtime, I was like, yeah, I need to go to the store and get actual deodorant because I'm a little ripe.
Usually saying, just use my crystal from a woman that you're spending some time with, that story ends in a dramatically different fashion.
Dang, but I mean, it must have been serious. Like, some people share toothbrushes. She shared her crystal with you.
Share my rock.
That's right.
Was it Whitney Houston, by chance?
Yes, it was Whitney Houston.
To tsunami. Terrible. Bad shame.
Rip.
But you could always give that a shot if you find that you don't want to go to the aluminum route. Just go
Rub a
get yourself a knife. Yeah,
Man, I'm easy enough to chafe. My poor Irish skin does not, deal with any. That's the reason I had to start using the Old Spice in the first place, is that I'm allergic to almost everything else. And even the native has been giving me the chafe on top of not smelling great. So yeah, generally I'm just in a full riot right now. I'm going to stick with what works. I understand why men, as you sort of gradually slide into middle age and, the egress out of life, you just stick with what works. It's like, nah, I'm not changing anything. I'm fine.
Yeah, and it's funny how, like, as you slide into middle age, certain joke gifts can become actual gifts. Like, I got a nose hair and ear hair trimmer as a gag gift a couple years ago. And at the time, I was just like, haha, yeah, I'm getting old, very funny. And now I'm like, hey, this thing actually comes in handy.
No, that's lifesaver, man. I legit have to take care of the ear hair probably, twice a week. It's devastatingly terrifying.
Oh,
yeah.
Man.
Yeah, no, it's true. I'm about a once a week fellow, but I get that, and then I get like this one random long nose hair that, even though I pluck it out by the root, it still comes back.
I have to say, though, it beats. There's a gentleman that when I first moved to Lake Havasu City, we were going into the movie theater, and he had to have at least 2-inch long shoulder hair. It actually was coming up over his tank top. So it looks
God.
like, Chewbacca's bandolier, just, completely covered in this thatch of disgusting fur on this poor fellow. And I was like, man, at least I'm not that bad. And I got to tell you, as of like a week ago, before I shaved, I was like, I'm getting close. I might be able to catch up. So it's a good thing I'm married, because otherwise I would be repelling 80 to 90% of the populace just on principle alone. I'm smelly, can't control most of my bodily fluids or functions, and I just got hair just plunging out of me everywhere that doesn't matter.
Well, at least you can actually grow a beard, and you too, Michael. When these damn nose hairs and ear hairs, when they pop up, I'm like, so you can come out the damn ear now, but I still can't grow a mustache for the life of me.
Just turn it into a chin strap and turn the nose hair into a stash.
See, the comb over works for, other hair as well. So just manipulate. You'll look like you have a nice little twirled mustache. You'll never be able to breathe out of your nostrils again, but hey, fashion.
You got to suffer for fashion. It's like
beauty is pain. Pain is beauty.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you're left with pit stains, and who wants that?
Mm-hmm.
Michael, apparently.
I don't. I would absolutely love if I didn't. But that's just a way of life. Just like your ears and nose hairs. I'm always moist.
Well,
and not in a good way.
Yeah, Michael and I are both free perspirers, which is almost a natural state in Arizona to begin with. And when you add onto your natural inclination to just bleed out of every pore. Sorry, it's Sunday, the divinity question in there. But it's not a good combination.
I don't sweat that much during the day, but I get really bad, like, night sweats where, like, I'll wake up and the bed is drenched.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sleep warm as well.
I don't sleep with blankets. I have the fan going. I can't, I most of the time just sleep in my underwear, just making sure I can perspire as best as I can. Still wake up some nights like I just jumped into the shower.
Yeah.
I have a fan for, the two on the call. I have a fan sitting right behind me that is literally directed at my armpits when I'm sitting at my desk in a room with AC on. I still need it just to make sure. I will get out of the shower. I have to take my shower super early in the morning because even after 9 a.m., if I get out of the shower, I will immediately start sweating. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what is the point of a shower if I immediately start sweating?
Well, that's a clean sweat, though.
I guess that's true. It's the part 2 of the shower, and then I go back in to rinse all the stuff that oozed out of my pores. Mm-hmm. Pre-wash, post-wash, that sort of thing.
It's an active sauna. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel really bad for Elda because the night sweats that I'll get too, it has like an acidic scent. So like the sheets end up like smelling like vinegary. It's after a week or two. So we have to like be on top of like regularly changing the sheets just because it's been like that for a long time. I thought it's not something that's happened as I got older. It's like as a teenager, same deal. I don't know what the deal is. And when I do, like if I go and I do backyard work or any of that stuff and I get sweaty, doesn't have that like acidic scent to it. But the nighttime when I'm fast asleep, I don't know, something's wrong.
So based on our prior discussions, so we did cover, fecal explosions last week. And now we're moving into a lot of the other putrescence that we haven't touched. So, I mean, we've basically moved from the Disinformed podcast to the Dead and Disgusting podcast. Just trying to be the most repellent human beings that we can be. So I suppose I'll pivot out of this being just truly down in the dumps. And on the subject of Dan Aykroyd, since we, had alluded to earlier, I had threatened in our prior discussion, since we touched on religion, I was going to dip our toe into another controversial subject, which is that of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings.
Oh, no.
And what the thoughts are of the individuals on the call. Because I know the scientist here is going to want to have that argument with me once more as the, the token non-believer. So give it to me, Michael. What do you think? Is there other life out there?
Probably. I mean, we have a giant universe. The chance of something occurring out there, non-zero, sure. Have they visited us? No, I don't think so.
You don't even believe the videos.
No, I'm able to Photoshop things super easily, and I have no skill whatsoever. I mean, tricks of light, weather balloons, what have you. There's always... I'm not going to be the person that will be like, actually, that's just swamp gas or something like that. But I'm like, unless it's something that I can reproduce that I can reproduce and, like, test.
The first to find alien species. And fuck it.
Yes, I'm Kirk.
Well, what if they've visited in the past, but just don't anymore? Like, what about the pyramids? Perhaps they had something to do with that.
Yeah, because they... So ancient civilizations
Mr. Ancient
were like,
aliens here.
Let's I got my hands up already in the aliens gesture.
And the hair.
Yeah. When you're storing stuff, what is just building anything, like throwing a pile of dirt, most basic thing, pile of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
It usually forms like a kind of a cone, right? Because it's, everything slides off. If the slope's too high, it'll slide. If the slope's not, if it's shallow, it won't. It'll eventually make like a pile, like a cone. So when people are thinking, hey, let's build something that's really big, what's the easiest structure that they can come up with that won't fall apart? A fucking cone or a pyramid.
Well, how would you get those big bricks way up there, though?
But also, that's not entirely a conical shape. I mean, there's the similar, but not entirely.
It's a rectangular pyramid as opposed to a circular pyramid. It's whatever. Like
igloo pyramid. Yeah.
Hand wavy. It's all semantics. No, the whole aliens taught people how to build the pyramids. No. They're smart. They just didn't understand basic things like germ theory because someone hadn't invented a microscope. It's not like everyone was just sitting there picking their noses and eating the boogers all day. Like, there were smart people. They just didn't have the foundation of knowledge to build upon. Like, it's not like we just suddenly evolved. Yeah, no.
And we're back to booger picking.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm sure that there's a good explanation for it, but whenever I do think about like just the sheer like massive force that must have been to be able to get those bricks towards the top, I can't help but think like maybe
Slingshot.
There was something to it there. Maybe there is something.
I like that. A trebuchet, if you will.
Ooh.
Throw it onto a trampoline and let it bounce up onto the top.
I mean, wheels. They invented the wheel. They could use wheels. You just got to get a couple of good axles on it.
Now, see,
put them on the bottom.
If you were pushing for the conical shapes again, now the wheel justification you would have had a better chance with. But
square wheels, circular wheels,
trapezoidal wheels, yes.
Ooh, okay.
Octagonal wheels.
Ooh, okay, all right.
Like a tank.
Dodecahedral?
Ooh,
big
I can
word.
appreciate
big
that.
word today.
Indeed. Ooh, big words. So, all right, Doc, as the resident Trekkie here, I would hope, you're going to offer your belief in the undiscovered country.
Oh, just infinite diversity and infinite combinations. IDIC. The classic Vulcan principle.
Mm-hmm,
I would say that it would be extremely arrogant of us to say that we are the only ones.
Yeah.
I would also say that I would imagine at some point we might have been visited. I don't think we're a regular pit stop. I think that's also extremely arrogant to think that, like,
True.
Earth is just this great spot that people just keep swinging by to check out. But I would say that probably at some point somebody's swung by, and probably along the lines, or possibly along the lines of Star Trek as well, where, the prime directive, right? If they aren't a warp-capable species, you don't interfere in their development.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that could very well be the same thing here, right? We could have been visited. They could have checked us out and been like, they're not ready, and moseyed on. So that's probably the case.
A day the Earth stood still kind of moment. Not ready for this. Y'all gonna nuke each other. Stop it.
I was like, this is dramatically different sentiment there, but yeah. Drop that gun or I'll shoot you. As opposed to, no, they just haven't, cultivated themselves enough yet. But it's funny, the more I think about it, like, the thing that always boggled my mind is more of, like, statistical principles, right? So I can't rule the possibility out, which it falls in line with, again, concepts of ghosts or spirituality or a God principle or any of these other things. Is like, I would rather walk into a situation being open-minded and consider that, okay, there's a possibility that this could happen to me, or I might experience this, but, like, the idea that in the vast and infinite universe that we have, just even within our observable range, now granted, you can't see onto planet surfaces with a telescope, certainly not sophisticated enough to go like, oh, there's some protozoan life that's developing down there because there's an atmosphere similar to our own. But just the sheer statistical anomaly that we are the one planet in just even our own solar system is shocking in and of itself, but then start expanding into the grander galaxy of, like, yeah, no, there's some form of consciousness that sprung to life here just completely out of the random mist. And to expect that has never been replicated anywhere else, or is something that is just purely our own, that is something that adds to that despondency that you feel when people talk about, like, oh, if there's no God, there's no point. And it's also like, yeah, if we're the only time that this has happened, like, what are we doing? We got to figure something else out. Because, yeah, I mean, let's go be a little more satanic about this and a little less conservative. Is what the hell's the point otherwise? If I'm literally turning into worm food and that was the only shot, and once we have exhausted this planet's resource, we're just gonna burn out and this will never happen again, man, we fucked this experiment up.
Yeah.
Or even if we don't exhaust the resources, eventually our sun's gonna kick the bucket. So either way, we've got a ticking time bomb on us, even if it is billions of years away.
It could take that long.
Okay.
Trying to argue if vaccines are real or something like that. So
we're not going to move on to climate change then?
Oh, my God.
Just hit every hot button topic in the course of sweeping through the past couple of weeks. So I want to make sure we go out on a brown note before we head to the door.
I think we are all qualified to talk about the topic of abortion right now.
Oh, okay. Well,
yes.
Gloves off, gentlemen. There is a doctor in the house, so I suppose we can start there.
Oh, well, it's,
I'm kidding. I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, well, how unfortunate.
I was totally okay with continuing the conversation about life.
You didn't want to break into a random version of Prom Night Dumpster Baby.
Oh.
Well, I think if we think of the movie Aliens and just these little creatures exploding out your belly.
Okay, now there's an interesting question for the Cineast in the room with me and the one who has not watched any films in general.
I have seen I can recall a good chunk of Alien. I don't remember if I saw it all the way through. I don't remember where I saw it, but I did see at least a good chunk of the beginning and then the chest burster scene. So,
as if to illustrate my point. I saw a part of that, the one movie that's the progenitor of a franchise that's now rolling 9 deep.
I did see Prometheus, though. Which,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, and see, on the topic of ancient aliens and, seeding civilizations, there's an interesting interpretation of it. But what is your favorite of the Alien franchise, Doc?
Oh, I'd say Aliens.
Really? Okay. So you go with less chat, more splat.
Yeah. I think so. In this particular franchise, yeah.
Cameron, I mean, it's there's a lot of charm in that movie. I think you invest in the character relationships there. The Marines are very vibrant. So you do, and obviously the action-oriented watcher is going to be a little more engaged in that if you're a little more bloodthirsty. I'm like the Alien. I love the Hitchcock principle of like not seeing the creature. And so all of that accumulated sort of stress and anxiety through the course of that film. And it's so claustrophobic on top of it. So it has that nice like ghost ship in space thing, which Event Horizon capitalized on very well later on. But yeah, Alien is still in my top 5. But I like all of the films. I'm not slagging any of them. Even Resurrection, which has an infinite amount of flaws to that, even though, and we can add into, since everyone dogpiles on, or like everyone's dogpiling on Joss Whedon these days, since he is responsible party for Alien Resurrection, we can all point our fingers at him. So like amongst the atrocities, you also helped to further diminish an already dying franchise. But
stop, they're already dead.
I do agree with you. I love Alien for the ghost ship and like the psychology behind it. I do love that. But I just found Aliens to just be like kind of a more fun ride. Like where
absolutely.
And there's especially like, for the time, like there's so many other things that have that, kind of ghost ship aspect to it, right? Where you do get that psychological horror behind the unseen. Outside of just Alien, whereas like Aliens itself, it was kind of a little bit more unique at the time, just for its like, I don't know, just carnage.
I think both of them are definitely like a boot through the door for either of the genres that they sort of take up arms for. The thing that I love about Alien in particular, but both of these are strengths for each of those movies, is the casting is brilliant on both parts. But they're for diametrically opposed storytelling. So you have your theater actors, because I mean, look at the general cast there between Ian Holm and John Hurt alone. It's like, okay, that's a significant pedigree for theatrical acting. That Sigourney Weaver started working in theater. So when you start throwing and plus like Yaphet Kotto's delightful in that runs, like a lot of very strong performers that are going to give you that sort of like terror and the catharsis that you need. And so on the flip side of that, you have a lot of very effervescent, bubbly personalities that get thrown into that hodgepodge that is the colonial marine cadre for Aliens. And it serves each purpose because you're invested enough that when they start dying, you're wounded with them because you don't like losing those characters. Particularly everybody, laments Bill Paxton going, both, literally and on screen.
Aww.
So yeah, it's, those are brilliantly done on both parts. And I think I credit to Cameron for taking it and just making a hard right with the franchise as well, and doing something that was just completely out of the other directive. Like, okay, well, we saw one and that was terrifying enough. What happens when you see 80 of them?
What did you think of AVP?
I liked AVP, but again, like I'm one of those like where we talked about even with comic books, like if I enjoy something, I will take a stomach full of it before I get sick of it. It's the same as like the sugar principle. I'll eat until I'm sick, like Louis C.K. So just the concept of seeing those two, mythic figures in sci-fi battling one another, and then to think that there's a grander history behind it. And the comics were always fun to begin with, so I was kind of like ripe for the picking when that came out. And plus, hearkening back to Event Horizon, that was also a Paul W.S. Anderson film, was AVP. So it's, same director. He wrote the screenplay for each. So it's kind of, they're kissing cousins, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah, I love when the big franchises square off against each other, Freddy versus Jason, Alien versus Predator. That for a little while that was getting really popular, and
yeah,
I was there for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Michael, you're up. Since you've seen Alien a little bit and you saw Prometheus.
I definitely, I had issues with the ending of Prometheus because I don't want to get too much into there because I saw it when it was in theaters, and I think my first immediate reaction to it was towards the very end, and I was like, oh, this is an Aliens prequel. And I said that out loud because it didn't occur to me until right at the very end when I think they showed the actual alien, and I was like, oh, and so I got a couple of people around me to laugh, but the only reason why I wasn't a big fan was it's a coined term now in audio or in movie critiques, the Prometheus school of running away from things. The whole scene where she's running away from the very, very flat ship that is a wheel and not walking to either side. And it's supposed to be very, intense and pulse pounding when she could have just jumped to either side and would have been okay. I think that's probably the most that I'll go about it. And then a lot of I feel like it was a little bit more schlocky in that, oh, this is a whole room full of eggs. Let's go in and see what's going on. Let's do that. It almost felt like a slasher film. There's no one in this car. There's no one around for miles. Let's start making out. Nothing bad will happen. That's the kind of vibe that I got from that movie. Now, what I do remember of Alien was I do love the slow burn. I do love the Hitchcockian principle. Don't blow the load in 5 minutes. Build. Just really, keep me on the edge me hard. And I feel like what I do remember of the movie was like that. Have either of you played Alien Isolation?
Yes. Adore it.
Is that a more recent game, or is that the one from the mid-90s?
Oh, no,
it's later.
Okay.
I think it was 2013, 14, something like that.
Yeah, it's right around that time.
Yeah.
The only
you're playing...
Yeah, the only Aliens game I played was on the original PlayStation.
Okay.
Circa 96, 97. That game was fantastic.
Yeah, this is you are playing the game as Ripley's daughter, who is essentially taken up a career in space exploration to try to figure out what happened to the Nostromo.
And shenanigans ensue.
And of course, shenanigans, yes. And you get to deal with all the same problems that you do throughout the franchise.
Have you ever seen a Species movie, Michael?
Is that the one with the lady that was trying to get
Natasha Henstridge?
Yeah, that was trying to get
impregnate
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I did see that. I don't remember a lot of it, but
you do
I watched it for the
films.
Articles. Yeah, that too.
It's a cheesy alien spin kind of. I like it. It's a long running series too. I don't know how many films there's in that, but there's more than I thought. Because they were still coming out with them even in 2016 or something like that, I think was the last one.
If we've learned nothing from American cinema is that they will take any excuse they can to get people to take their clothes off.
Very true.
Having just completed the first season and, technically a portion of the second as well, of Game of Thrones again. As I was starting up, Melissa's like, there's a lot of sex in that season. And I went, it's not really that much, is it? And then the second I start back in, it's like, oh yeah, no, there was a lot of sex in this first season. Yeah.
Yeah, it's HBO and it's also George R. Martin. So it's literally the sex every other scene.
Hats off to you going back to rewatching it. I don't think I can anymore. I was so excited about it originally, but just knowing how it ends, I'm kind of...
See, that's, again, another one of those, I will express the unpopular opinion, and this, it's not hipster of me so much as I think just to other folks, is I really treat most cinematic or literary experiences, and this falls back into All Quiet on the Western Front again as well, I'm just on the roller coaster. Most of the time, I don't want to anticipate where the twists and turns are taking me. yes, you can get cerebral about it and start trying to, like, my mother is one of those who loves to try to rewrite the script as they're watching the film. So she'll start weighing in on that. Oh, they should have done this. Or, oh, I bet this guy's the killer. And I just want to shut up and, lock my hands around the bars and scream as I write. Cause it's intended to be a distraction from reality where my brain already is automatically overactive to begin with. So I typically tend to just shut down and see where the ride takes me. I don't always wind up in a place that I enjoy, but as I was running through the end of the televised version of Game of Thrones, I was like, it wasn't to me so far afield from the character developments in every aspect where I was I found it a complete affront like so many others did. I think it, in certain respects, to my interpretation, and I have no intention of offending anybody by saying this, but I think a lot of people were invested in the Dany storyline, specifically because you're seeing a very strong female character who has braved so many hurdles and pitfalls and was not just another pretty thing to be on somebody's arm. She actually was able to, gain and maintain power and dealt with things fairly deftly. So when you drive that very lovely ship into the iceberg, it's gonna get some feathers ruffled. But when the entire discussion of the show is that the Targaryens are a little bent and they don't tend to respond well to criticism, she handles a lot of situations throughout the course of the storytelling, both in the books and in the show, not with the greatest aplomb. She tends to respond very, just even like I'm there at the gates of Karth presently, and as they're prepping to, walk back in, she's threatening them with absolutely nothing. She's got a legion of starving people with her. She has absolutely nothing to make good on the threat, and still, attempts to threaten them into cajoling them into doing what she wants to get them to capitulate. And I was like, that's kind of evidence of practice that kind of gets executed through the whole series. So when she went off the rails, I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think possibly some of the backlash isn't maybe so much related to the character development, so much as maybe the dialogue and the writing of the show, because it had been done so exceptionally well for the first bunch of seasons that it was just like no critiques, right? It was just perfection. And then there was a very noticeable drop in quality when they kind of had to go off script, we don't have the books to follow anymore. So now we're kind of freewheeling, and we don't have those references and dialogue that we can pull straight from the books and stuff. And so I think, like I said, I can kind of feel what you're saying there. I agree, where the characters ended maybe isn't so bad, and I could kind of agree with that. But the way we navigated them there wasn't handled as definitely as previously had been done, and maybe that's where it is. It's it went from an exceptionally good to mediocre in terms of writing.
Okay.
It wasn't bad. But when there's such a noticeable drop when you're going from A+ to now we're a B show.
Yep. And go ahead, Michael.
I was gonna say what I'll say about the show writers is that they are great at adapting someone else's work. But when they had just notes and bits and pieces, that's what they had to work on. They could take someone else's vision and masterfully produce it. But when it came time to, now they're out of material, then they had to, they had an end goal and they wrote to fill the end goal. And they revealed as much in, in interviews and stuff like that they were trying to get to the end.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know why a lot of people were upset. I admit I was confused, but also because I had only watched the first 2 seasons and I watched the 7th with a bunch of other people that had.
God.
I had read the books, so I at least had some context. I was like, all right,
okay, is
this person dead? Okay, so that's a little different. All right, cool. It wasn't like I was going in there saying it should have ended this way. I was like, what changed so that I have the context to understand what's going on? Because they're 2 separate things. We've talked about that.
Absolutely.
And I was trying to be social in this regard because I was invited to, watch it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that. I don't have a lot of the context. Where is this character? Oh, they died. Okay, cool. But I was confused by some things, but I feel like that just might be me not understanding a lot of the things. And it didn't help that the people I was sitting with were very upset by how things were turning out because they weren't getting the payoff that they felt should have happened. And it could have been from they didn't understand the character motivations. The character motivations weren't explained fully. They were going from like, well, here's this like 10-hour journey, like from across like the whole continent to like, oh, well, they got there in 5 minutes, you know, because that was one thing I remember hearing a lot about was that like people were zipping. They were zipping all over the place, like where they would be in King's Landing, like one scene, and then the next thing they were at the wall or something like that. And so I knew there was a lot of complaints there, and that could just be like they also didn't want to make more seasons.
I was like, at the same point, it's like, yeah, it's the Tolkien principle of like, I don't want to watch people walk for 5 hours. Give me something else. It's funny though that we talk about that because yes, it is much easier to refine already established materials than it is to spin something out of whole cloth. And if you need something that is a greater example than the Lord of the Rings trilogy versus the Hobbit trilogy, as the same principle of like they had a wealth of material to pull from the Lord of the Rings, and you know, with Silmarillion and all the other materials as well, to a dearth of material with The Hobbit, where they just had to you know, let's materialize things because we can't just do, you know, maybe that's a movie, maybe a movie and a half if you really want to get into it. So to make 3, they really had to just whip stuff out, and the quality was dramatically different. And yeah, you lose something when you don't have that source material to draw from, definitely.
Yeah, when you're going from just adaptation to fan fiction writing, I feel like that's where it starts getting like, because those are two totally different skills.
Oh, for sure.
You know, the thing that like the candy that gets me through is the spoonful of sugar with the medicine was seeing, you know, like the Battle of the Bastards and seeing dragons fighting against White Walkers and things. And I'm like, the stuff that you had, all that accumulated sort of momentum to get you to that point that coalesced into those things, I think helped to distract me from a lot of the other things that, yeah, at the end of the day, it's problematic, but throwing it into a completely different perspective as well. When you're reading the books, there are so many subplots and tangents and characters that if they have a bearing on the main thrust of the story, it feels like it's going to be more as like, you know, a rocket where we talk about the fuselage sort of detaching and propelling something forward.
Well, sometimes you don't revisit that same character for ages. Like I would finish a chapter focused on a character, and then without like reading the skip, I would just like kind of quickly flip through to see when do I visit this person again. And sometimes it wouldn't be for the rest of the book. And it's like, well, there's still a good chunk of material left. And I'm like, God damn, I mean, like, I really want to know what happens next. So, I mean, to your point, there's just so many plots, so many things getting juggled that you could literally just leave behind a character for ages and then circle back and be like, hey, remember that stuff that happened 150 pages ago?
And
or when you're adapting it, just leave them out. Like Strong Belwas, my favorite character from the books. All he'd do is he would just eat onions, like the liver and onions, and he would just tell people to slash his belly, and that was it. He was a perfect character. Sorry, I interrupt you. I just wanted to say,
it's perfect character. Love it.
Explain my love of Strong Belwas.
The laughable thing to me when I was looking back on it is like trying to reconfigure things in an appropriate light, right? And see things on the positive bend. I was like, what I feel like Martin does that this show does so deftly as well is it gives you this varying degree of complexity between the moral compass of saying like, you think you've seen villainy, and then just something more insidious happens and something more grandiose and violent happens. And like Joffrey was a big bad, you know, and you're sitting there watching like, I loathe this character. And then when you're watching it subsequently or you're reading multiple times, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's Joffrey. I mean, he's mostly impotent as a character. He does some semi-horrific stuff. He takes out one of the, you know, most beloved characters generally, but compared to Ramsay, He's not so much of a such, as it were. So it's great. It has that Walking Dead principle where it's like the escalation is so impressive when you start. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's what propelled us forward into this next villain. And then to have the moral ambiguity of the people who you saw as just inextricably linked with villainy start to twist and turn around and come the other way, with like Jaime Lannister is loathed and then starts to become a character that you start to sympathize with and appreciate. And unfortunately, it's another one of those where it goes under the water at the end of the show and you're like, no,
that was so sad.
The redemption arc just crushed. But at the same time, you're like, okay, makes sense for the character. Anything, that's the one thing he's not going to be rational about. And okay, I'll just roll with it. But they really do that so well between like the Hound, and they're constantly shifting characters out of whether you're appreciating their cause and in support of it, and then you immediately start to flip where you're like, wait, hold on a second, that's not right. Then even, the Daenerys Jon Snow relationship is really one of those where there's just a weird moral ambivalence depending upon where you're standing. Like, you're both drawing a hard line for no good reason. You could make some subtle, slight changes and you'd be fine, but it's like, nope, irresistible force in the immovable object. We're just going to run this thing into the wall and see what happens. Pun intended.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So, in any event, I feel like that was enough of a meandering goulash, and it would have been important for us to clarify that, yes, we had, on top of my illness, we had a bunch of other weird circumstantial problems that interceded on behalf of the show this week. So we're recording a little late, which means that also what was intended to be the After Dark for Friday just got released on Sunday. So I hope you're enjoying that for those of you who are keeping track of those. But so we're getting on top of it. We're going to be a little more rambly and crazy today, just so that we can get you some content and we're not just going to leave you all sitting in the dark. So kudos and thanks to editor Michael for completing this as you're listening now, because it's a lot of effort and small time, and it's not like he doesn't have other things on his plate at the present. So, but I feel like that was a fun little serpentine run through just our standard operating mindsets as per usual. Started with aliens, ended with dragons, and the dances in between.
Pit stains. Went through aliens. Went through another type of aliens, and then ended with Game of Thrones. Which,
well, some people were sweating at the end of Game of Thrones for an entirely different reason than you're sweating, but it all
comes
stunk
back. Ooh,
one way or the other.
Circle.
Man, beautiful.
Yes,
Mwah,
yes.
chef's
Some people
kiss.
will say that much like natives' bourbon and orange bitters scent, the last season of Game of Thrones was not meant for human consumption. But so on that note, I think that is going to officially put the dragons into the tomb, as it were, and we'll leave you all be for this week. But we appreciate you being here as always. It is a delight. I apologize that there was no lie here, other than there was going to be an actual point to the conversation, I'm sure.
Or the lie is he actually
Still
loves the
got him.
deodorant and he's wearing it right now.
Yeah,
And he actually eats it too.
yeah, that would be an interesting proposition.
That's how he got the food poisoning, because he tried it.
It's so tacky.
Bitters.
Yeah. All right. Well, that said, there is some joy on the horizon, because from what I understand, Michael does have a concept that he's very excited to unveil.
It'll be an interesting two-parter, because it will technically be a two-parter, but not necessarily. And I will just be vague and not explain any more.
Hey, it fits the parameters for this week's show.
Yeah.
It's on the format. So look forward to that, friends, neighbors, Romans, countrymen, lovers of the green grass sea, and breakers of chains amongst you, I suppose.
First of her name.
Too many titles. Couldn't be bothered. So, I believe that's going to wrap it up. Of course, there is a link tree down below in the show notes. You can check out all of our irrelevant socials and all of our other material. There's plenty of content winging your way, including new episodes of this show every lovely Monday morning on your preferred podcast provider app. And, of course, more Tubes of You fare that flies your way mostly on Fridays. Occasionally, it's just any day of the week. It's random. It's a drop of a hat. So, just figure it out. You'll get there. You know how you can do that? If you subscribe. Smash that like button, as Michael's so prone to say.
Ring that bell, too, while you're at it.
You can ring my bell. We'll be happy to have you. And we did get some comments from people who did not believe that I did not have a good time in Las Vegas, shockingly enough. So thank you all for the engagement, as always. It's a delight. But I think that's going to officially bring this thing to a close, like the covers of a book slamming shut. And for another sweaty installment of this, the Disinformed Podcast, I am Shane.
And I'm Michael.
And I'm Michael. And zippity zoop, we're out of here.
You.